Paul, wonderful to see you again. Thank you very much for your time. Now, you delve into this topic in your column today. How concerned are you about this isolationist push among sections of the Republican Party, and how influenced do you think Donald Trump would be by it if he became president?
Well, I think it's very concerning. I mean, Tony Abbott, and I quoted Tony Abbott this morning saying that given the nature of the world at the moment, given the threats in Europe, in the Middle East, in East Asia, it's very important to have an incumbent in the White House who's got moral resolution and strategic strength. Now, the problem with Donald Trump is Donald Trump clearly is not prepared to fight in Ukraine. It was not just a question of being an appeaser, being probably the worst appeaser we've seen in Europe since the 1930s. He actually appears to be on Putin's side. And that is particularly dangerous because all these conflicts are tied into one another. The view of the Chinese, the view of the Russians is that America is weak, it's divided internally, that it's not prepared to fight, that it doesn't have the political or military will. Well, if Trump becomes president and does something to verify that, that will make the world far more dangerous even than what it is now. So yes, I think this is a very dangerous situation.
It's not just about Ukraine and Russia, of course. It's if we don't stop Russia, if we don't stop Putin on Ukraine, he could go onto the Baltic nations, he could go into Poland, and it emboldens all of the dictators, Iran, North Korea, and China as well.
Well, of course it will affect China, and China's watching the Ukraine conflict very, very carefully. And the whole question of deterrence in East Asia in relation to Taiwan, of course, depends upon the Chinese believing that America's support for Taiwan is genuine. So the whole question of deterrence rests on credibility. If credibility is destroyed in Ukraine, well, of course that's going to be relevant in terms of Taiwan and East Asia.
Paul, I'd love to ask you about the fracturing we're seeing at the moment in the relationship between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. There's been rare public criticism that's just becoming stronger and stronger. Israel needs the United States to be its ally, and if there is criticism, for it to be said in private, but that's not what we're seeing here.
Oh no, I mean, this is now just an open rift. It's particularly dangerous, and I think it's very deep-seated. There are fundamental differences now between Biden and Netanyahu, and these are going to be particularly tricky to navigate. I think there are three main differences. One is how this war is being pursued at the moment, with the Americans concerned, the Americans wanting some form of ceasefire. So you've got a difference there. Then you've got a difference in terms of the political arrangements in Gaza after the war. And then, of course, in terms of the long-term framework, there's a fundamental difference between Netanyahu, who is opposed to a two-state solution, and Biden, who is committed to it. So I think this fracturing is really important. Important to stress, however, that the United States continues to support Israel. The United States continues to provide military aid to Israel, but these differences are very substantial.
There was news today that Benjamin Netanyahu was furious by this so-called intelligence report that suggested his leadership was over. Paul, you don't need an intelligence report to tell you that his leadership is over because he oversaw October 7. It happened on his watch. And, you know, I've never been a vocal critic of Netanyahu. I think it's up to Israelis to have their democratic elections. But this happened on his watch. And the reality is that it's not just him. All of the heads of the departments, of the Defence Force, the intelligence, etc., they will all have to go. That's my information.
No question about that at all. I mean, Netanyahu failed. His strategy failed because he believed that Hamas could be contained. That was proved to be wrong. The operational and intelligence failure around October 7 is unforgivable. Netanyahu at some point will have to go. He will go. There's no question about that. It's just a question of how this happens and what happens in the interim.
Yeah, exactly. Paul Kelly, I can't give you enough praise for your columns every single week. They are the best thing about The Australian. Thank you very much for joining me.